Good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Wednesday, February 19th, 2025 at 10:10 in the morning. So now we're switching our discussions from our relationship with the Canadian government to our career technical education. And we know that there's bill hopefully sometime along the way that's going to be introduced. But I think this committee has been given, delegated the responsibility of looking at career technical education, governance and funding to start here anyway. And so I thought it would be good for us just to start laying the groundwork. We don't know we know what the first APA report said. We don't know what the second one is going to say. We won't hear that till next week. But I know that Bacted has a paper out, and I'm sure that everyone here is been watching and listening and has some ideas of their own. So I thought we'd start there and go for it. So Jay, welcome. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for the invitation. For the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. All the CTE directors are members of the Vermont Principals Association. I will mention that one of the best political books I ever read was the Vermont Papers by John McClowery and Frank Bryan. So if we decide we're going to secede and form our own country, I'm willing to work with the committee on doing that. So, first of all, I'd like to make it clear that the VPA does not have an official position on the BOCES approach to governance, nor do we have an official position on the foundation formula contemplated by the administration, although we do have concerns about the projected $180 million in projected savings without details, which to us seems to mean less services for children. So to the degree possible, we're reserving judgment till we see an actual bill or bills, and then we'll try to respond appropriately to the given committee of jurisdiction as those bills come out. What I can do, however, is share some high-level thoughts for your consideration as a committee as relates to career and technical center education in Vermont. And let me start by saying I think success for our CTE programs in Vermont is vital for our future as a state. And I typed up these notes just in my office a little while ago, so I will send them to Andres so you can have them on for record afterwards. So the first area I want to touch on is competition. The current tuition funding model puts high schools and CTE centers in a position where they're competing for limited dollars. This competition doesn't serve students well ultimately, and in some cases, especially for small high schools, significantly limits the options for students at that high school who choose not to or are not able to get into admission at the Career Center. Decoupling this should be a priority. There are several ways we can do this, and I can think of, including taking money off the top as was proposed before of the education fund. There's no perfect solution, and any movement we make toward limiting competition without hurting school districts, especially those with small high schools because of necessity, is better. And I'll give you an example. You have a small high school where a number of the junior and senior students go to the Career Center, and the kids that are not going to the school, to the Career Center, are left behind. Sometimes they don't get the breadth of opportunities that we'd like to see them have, especially in the small high schools. So that's something to think about. Another issue to think about is program enrollment limits. You could get specific information on this from each program and each center through their CT directors, and maybe some of those directors will talk about that today. However, what I've heard from a number of CTE directors, as well as high school principals, is that popular programs fill up fast and that there are waiting lists. This often leads to students who have a real high interest in a program being put on a waiting list or having to settle for their second choice, or not being able to take a CTE program at all. Some principals maintain that students who perhaps have the most need for a CTE program, students with high interest in a program but may be struggling in regular high school traditional courses, are not selected in an increasingly selective process for high demand programs. So if you've got a program can only hold 16 seniors, you've got 32 seniors that want to be in that program, let's say it's allied health, you got kids that are left behind that maybe really would benefit from those programs more than some of the students that are selected, because the admissions process may include things like grades, student behavior, those types of things. And so there's going to be a natural selection process that may disadvantage some students.
Jay, and yeah, probably we can get more on this, but when they look at these students, especially if they're seniors, to take into account the field that they've chosen to go on to after graduation. So if you're talking about health, LNA, nursing or whatever, you know, it seems to me that those people would rise to the top before others were chosen, if we have to have choices of who's going to be in the program.
I think you'd have to ask specific CTE directors that, but what I do know is that there are some CTE programs that have ties to personalized learning plans of kids and others that don't. And there's some schools that have done a really good job with personalized learning plans, helping kids flesh out what they think they might want to do next, and others that maybe haven't done as good a job of that. I'll leave it there if that's okay. And stop me anytime, please. Another area to be thinking about is collectively bargained agreements. Hiring teachers and dealing with local CBAs can be problematic for superintendents, CTE directors, and potential CTE hires. An advantage to having a common CBA just across the state among CTE employees, for example, would be that it'd be easier to utilize industry standards and pay to attract higher qualified candidates to our CTE programs. And I'll give you an example. When I was a superintendent, my last superintendency before I came to the BPA 8 years ago, I had 2 high schools, 5 elementary schools, and 2 middle schools, and 1 CTE center. And I was trying to hire a carpentry teacher for CTE, and I had this person who was phenomenal. We ultimately were able to hire her. We had a great union. They worked really closely with us. I couldn't pay him nearly enough to hire. Fortunately, he chose to take the job anyway. I was talking to him like 2 weeks ago and said, "How's it going?" He goes, "Oh, I left." I said, "Why?" He goes, "I just couldn't make it work. It's making almost twice as much of my own business." So, so we are losing people like that. So we've got to acknowledge that industry standard piece. And it's hard to do that. And that's not the fault of the union. I want to be really clear on that. Unions are representing all the people that are in their bargaining unit. So if I've got a union that says teachers on step 3 with a master's get X, and I'm hiring somebody who's, from the private industry, I have to live within whatever that collectively bargaining agreement says. So having something that's different for CTE teachers, to me, just makes sense.
We've heard the same thing in higher ed as well. We're talking about nurses and
I can see that.
trying to hire a nurse
Yeah.
to teach in college, where they're making 120 or better in the hospital and bringing them down to 75 or 80.
Yeah.
Just doesn't work.
Yeah, and the same thing happens for nurses in high schools and elementary schools all the time. Well, a real good friend of mine, my grandson and her are in the same grade, 11th graders now. I've known the kids since he was a little kid. We've always tried to get his mother to say, "Come be a school nurse. You'll have the same calendar as your kids." And she's like, I work in emergency room. I can't take the pay cut." So, common calendar is another piece. Those that have been around for a while know who I am, know that I'm one of the people that tried to lead a common calendar approach many years ago. I still have arrows on my back from that. However, I think the superintendents are working on that, and I think there's more and more talk about trying to come up with a common calendar, which is great. This is especially important for CTE centers for several reasons. In many systems, students miss up to 2 or 3 weeks of actual CTE learning time because of the difference of calendars from area schools. Think about things like exam schedules and those types of things as well. Or all our juniors going on a field trip, so all of a sudden all the kids from X town are not there, at your center that day. It really makes it hard for the teachers to run the programming that they normally run. This has improved a lot, but still is an issue. A common statewide calendar would fix this issue for the most part. An added advantage would be that CTEs would be better positioned to provide professional learning opportunities for similar programs, so that you could have program-specific training from experts and have some type of economy of scale. An example given, bringing all the allied health teachers in the state together several times during the year without hiring substitute teachers. It would be on professional learning days that they had in their calendar. You could bring them together. You could bring the automotive teachers together and really work on specific content area training for those teachers. The other thing I want to touch on briefly is the comprehensive regional high school approach. I've heard people from the governor's office talk about this. I want to say publicly that that's a great approach, especially if we're starting out from scratch. The issue with that, with comprehensive high schools, with CTEs, part of that is if you had each high school with, say, 1,000 students, which is typically about what you need for a comprehensive high school, or thereabouts with brand new, shiny facilities, best case scenario, you're looking at current construction costs, requirements for quality and safety, and without considering staffing, according to my close friend ChatGPT, we would be looking around $200 million per school. And so that's an issue that's really, that's problematic. As far as I know, the governor's proposal doesn't have any funds to even support updates to the current CTE facilities. So although I like the concept of regional high schools, not really sure it's practical in our current environment. I'll touch on also embedded credit systems. I think we need a better system to determine whether a class provides a credit proficiency for a content area. Currently, it's all over the place. I would like to see the AOE take the lead on this. I even think having the same basic graduation standards across the state is something to consider. I know we talk about local control, but we have micro local control in Vermont. And so last year I had a perfect example. I had a principal call me and say, I'm really upset with my local CTE because they're giving one of my seniors credit for English in a program that I just don't think meets the rigor of our English classes. Swear to God, had to be 55, 60 minutes later, the CTE director is calling me upset with this principal because his principal is going to stop this kid from graduating because this kid doesn't have the requirement for English that they need. Both talking about the same kid. We need to fix that. That's not, we have to come up with some criteria that whether you like it or not, as a principal or CTE director, this is the criteria for embedded credit for English. This class has it or doesn't have it, and that's all there is to it. And we go with that. Can't be that Essex High School and South Portland High School have different standards about which class they're going to allow for embedded graduation requirements. That's not fair to kids. Cost, CTEs are expensive to fund. Any changes in funding needs to make sure they do not put us in a place where we provide less opportunities for the students of Vermont. Investments in CTE programming, especially in high pay fields, is money well invested. I want to make that really clear up front. Infrastructure, I talked about it a little bit. Any changes in the law that provide for school construction funding must also take into consideration the current and future needs of our technical education system. I would say overall, our CTE's infrastructure is probably a little bit better, maybe a lot better than some of our high schools, but I still think it's something we need to keep in mind as we look at construction funding. AOE staffing, I'd like to see the AOE staffing to the level it was as a department many years ago. Included in that would be people that would have expertise in CTEs that could provide our CTE centers with that level of expertise. And then finally, financial oversight management. I'm not sure about how this would work, but I believe there is a merit in considering some type of business manager or state CTE superintendent to oversee all of the CTEs. Having someone well-versed and solely dedicated to that world, I think could be very beneficial. That said, there need to be a lot of green book changes and lots of questions would arise around contracts, district property, local, regional control. But it's an idea that I believe has merit and should at least be considered. When I was a superintendent, I was teaching school finance to college level, had a lot of experience with that. Had a lot of experience leading organizational change. My weakest area was understanding CTE. I hired a good CTE director, tried to support them. As superintendents, we're not really trained to really understand all the ins and outs of CTEs. So oftentimes CTE becomes like a distant cousin. And we need to really make sure that it's in the forefront and that we're really focusing on how we can help those programs grow and reach kids and also be financially solvent. That's all my prepared remarks. Subject to any questions you might have for me. Representative Randy, did I hit the things you wanted me to hit in terms of overview? For the most part?
That's a pretty good overview. I think, as in everything, the details matter, right? So I've had multiple conversations with superintendents and other folks about the common calendar, let's say.
Yeah.
And when I say, and including professional development time off, they say, no, right? But I think it has to be a comprehensive statewide calendar that includes professional development time so that we can, right? So I think when we're talking about these things, we have to understand, like it's important and we're really going to have to dig into those details. There was something else that you said that I just wanted to highlight, but it has currently escaped me.
So you were saying from your perspective as a superintendent that you don't get as much, I guess, interaction or knowledge about the CTEs. Do you find that trickles down to our school boards and their relationships to CTEs and if they are in full understanding about what goes into them?
Yeah, I think you gotta remember there's three different models, right? So in the system I was in, it was and that was before Act 46 when I left there. So that system hadn't even consolidated yet. So Enosburg and Richford both had their own school districts. And there was a career center, which was underneath the Enosburg School Board. So I was very involved with the details of their funding and stuff like that with my business manager because we had to be. But I didn't have the expertise on how Perkins funds work and all those things that like Jody Emerson would have that's living in that world. So if you're a CTE center director who's also a superintendent, you're living in that world, you probably have a really strong understanding. If you're a superintendent who's also overseeing a bigger district, you may not have that same level of knowledge. That was the point that I was trying to make there.
Oh, yeah, no, I understand that. I guess my question is this does this become a carry-on effect? Because what we've been hearing also is that our CTEs, just sort of from a marketing perspective, have a very different reputation than the other schools that are in our very complicated school systems.
Yeah.
And so my thought is, you know, as we as ambassadors of CTE are out there talking to folks, is this trickling down also to our school boards? Do they understand about CTE? Do they understand all the ins and outs and you know, the benefits that it provides?
I certainly think that when I was superintendent, mine did.
You did,
And I
okay.
think most people that know me know that I'm a pretty strong advocate for CTEs.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we gotta, I mean, perfect example, I was talking to a CTE director who I was trying to get to leave being a CTE to take over a problematic high school. Who said, please don't make me do that. And he said, every kid wants to come to my school. I love being a CTE director. And kids do want to be there. That's tremendous. If we could find more ways for kids to really want to be in high school, all kids, I think that would be really advantageous. And CTEs have a much better reputation now than they did when I was. It used to be CTEs where all those kids went to. Not anymore. You know, you got kids that are valedictorians, salutatorians, that are outstanding students that want to be in the allied health class or whatever it might be. That really want to be in CTEs, and we need to lean into that. And we need to look at the cost of college and say to kids, you know, if you don't have a plan, the trades is a good place to go. And CTE centers can be a way to get to that. And CTE centers can also be a way to get to higher education too. We had a lot of kids from Munisburg that went allied health and now are nurses, emergency room nurses. Some that are now doctors. So it's a strong area. And I don't know if you know this or not, but we have a need for electricians, plumbing and heating in City.
Yeah, you know that.
Yeah, right? Shocking, huh? So I think CPEs could be poised to be responsive to those needs and really help drive that in our state. And that's where a lot of high-paying jobs are going to come from.
I just wanted to add, I think that our proficiency-based graduation requirements lends us to an easy transition to set requirements for graduation from CTEs, right? I think I think everybody has heard me say statewide graduation requirements is a low-hanging fruit, makes a lot of sense. We don't have enough difference or students or any across the state. But that's my opinion. I'm sure I can have a very involved conversation with somebody else, but proficiency-based graduation requirements, right, is the thing that should simplify graduation from CTEs, because we just have to be very clear on what that is. And it's not credits, it's not specific
Seat time.
seat time, it's not even specific reading material. It is, are you proficient in these areas, right? So I think that what was that, 2016, 2017, somewhere around there, that the legislature changed there. I think that's set the law to put in place.
Remember, that was a very uneven distribution and process where we took half of the schools in the state and trained them. I was lucky as a superintendent we were in, and one of my good friends, Ned Kirsch, who's recently passed, was superintendent of Fairfax at the time. Everybody was told the second year it's going to be the rest of them, and then all of a sudden there's no money, and we just stopped doing it. So there are places that have very little proficiency, places that have really robust programs.
Yeah, no, it is not working well statewide, but I think that's.
Conceptually, I agree with you. Yeah.
So you mentioned, you mentioned changes in collective bargaining. What's the current landscape right now for CTE staff?
It depends. They belong to whatever their local collectively bargaining group is. So if I'm a CTE superintendent and they're my employees, and we would have our own collectively bargaining agreement. If I'm in a district like where I used to be, which is now, I don't know what it's called. It's Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union. When I was there, Richford and Eastborough are now combined. They got a new name. That group right there would be the teachers in those schools. And the teachers at the CT center would all be under the same collectively bargained agreement. So if I wanted to hire somebody to come out and say my mechanics teacher retired, and I want to hire a new mechanics teacher, I had to live within that collectively bargained agreement. So that person only had, didn't even have a bachelor's degree yet, or just barely had a bachelor's degree. I'd be starting them on the bottom of that pay scale. Absent language in the collective bargaining agreement that gives me authority to do more. We had language. I was allowed to give them, I think, up to 3 years on the contract if they were coming from industry. That's extra $4,000 or $5,000. It's not enough for somebody who's making a lot more money.
So it really kind of depends on what the governance structure is right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if the CTE is sort of embedded within the high school, it sounds like they're part of the collective bargaining agreement. But if you're, have a sort of regional, theater school kind of thing.
All depends on who the governing board is. And Jody can touch on that a little bit because her system is different than the one that I had. The one that I had might be the most common issue, not had, yes. So like for example, Essex is in that situation where they would have to follow the same rules as all the other Essex teachers. So Essex middle school teachers, Essex high school, the Career Center, they are all going to be under the same collectively bargained agreement. There might be some carve-outs in that agreement that give them more latitude to hire people from industry. That's possible. That could be negotiated, but they would have to live within that contract.
Good question. There's one area that I see happening right now in my own area, North Country and Lake Region. We have two SUs. We have Tech Center embedded in North Country. Lake Region's ascending school. And so trying to align schedules, which I think Gwen is doing a good job of doing. And then get the travel issue as well. But then the other issue is I don't think they're getting enough students into Lake Region, into the Tech Center in Newport. So they're creating their own programs at the high school. So the taxpayers, and I'm in between both districts. So the taxpayers in the Orleans Central SU are actually paying for the Tech Center. They're also paying for this added tech that's being provided at the high school as well. And so, how do we, we've got to think about how do we get those sending schools more in line to get those kids into the Tech Center.
I think one thing I'll say, which is a little controversial, I've been saying this since 2005, so I'll keep saying it. I think the supervisory union is one of the dumbest structures in the history of the world. I think if you combine somehow and have school districts, you got one board of authority that can be looking at the scale of the operation of whatever your organization is. And I think in the supervisory union, I compare the supervisory union to being like the Articles of Confederation. Everybody belongs, but we may not want to send taxes in this year. Good luck against England in the war. Whereas the Constitution says we're all in this together, we all belong together, and we have a federal system. So same thing. I think you need to make school districts, give the authority to school districts to look at those problems on a local level and decide what makes the most sense. And right now, if I'm a high school situation, I have a kid who's going to the Tech Center, it's taken some money away from my high school program. There's no disputing that. So what some principals have tried to do and some superintendents have tried to do is put programs of high interest in their school so that kids won't necessarily go. And secondly, in some cases, it's a response to waiting lists at the career centers. We can't get our kids in the X program, so we're going to set up something of our own that those kids might go to.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for all your work. Appreciate you.
Sir, thank you for the walk. Jody?
I know that Erica has a really short window and she's on
Okay.
the line. So
Yep. Okay. Hey, Erica.
Hello. I have a short window because it's my vacation week, but it's not my kids' vacation week, so things are a little a little funky in my world.
Joining you.
Are you guys ready for me to kind of get started?
Yes, we are.
Awesome. So I'm Erica Schneider. I'm the director of the Hartford Area Career and Technology Center. I've been in that position for 4 years. I've lived in Vermont for 6 years. I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old in Vermont Public School. And a little bit about my center. So we are a half-day center. We have kids for 2 hours and 15 minutes at our center, and then they spend the rest of their day at their ascending school doing their English and doing their math. One thing that's unique about my center is that we have a number of people that come from New Hampshire. About half of my students come from New Hampshire, and then half are from Vermont. So we really serve the Upper Valley as a region. We have about 330 students, and kind of like Jay was saying, we've got high demand for a lot of our programs. One of the programs that we have some high demand for is building trades, and I want to share just a story about a recent graduate. So we had somebody who graduated 2 years ago from our building trades program. And when this student was in school, they were not particularly engaged, not particularly enthusiastic about school in general. They joined the building trades program and they started to find that that was their passion, that was their interest. Our building trades teacher had somebody come, another recent alum come from Vermont State University to talk about the program there. And the student said, "Oh, I hadn't thought about higher education. That hadn't been something that had crossed my mind." Went up, visited Vermont State University, and is now enrolled there in their building trades management program. He's interned at Casella in the summer. He's doing all kinds of different things with architecture and building trades. And we've helped that student to make that next step and to stay in the state. And in a time when it's pretty hard to hire anybody for anything construction related, it feels really good to be able to see the pathways that CTE supports in terms of building students' skills, but then also helping keep students in state and kind of help to grow our state and grow our economy. So the work that we're doing on the individual level with kids, I would say, is really working. But there's absolutely some kind of structural challenges. Much of what Jay said is stuff that we've talked about as tech directors as well, and most of it is things that we agree with. And what I kind of just want to set the stage with, and I know Jody is going to get into a few more specifics, is that there's been a lot of thinking done about potential changes to CTE over the past 8 to 10 years. So there have been a few different white papers. I'm hopeful that most of you are familiar with the APA study that was put out in 2023. That study we feel is very comprehensive and aligns well with what we want to see. And one of the things that we are hoping for is, as this process continues, is that we can really use the expertise of those folks who have done that pretty comprehensive study to help move things forward. They've done some really great work looking across the whole state, and we really want to make sure we get that final report and get some of their modeling. In terms of where we are as centers, we have all sorts of different models, but in general, I would say we're ready for a change and we're ready to collaborate with the AOE, with the legislature to help move things forward. We have some changes like non-competitive funding that we've been asking for since at least 2017. And we are really kind of ready for those changes. I think the big thing, as others have mentioned, is just the specificity on the details. I was emailing back and forth with Rebecca Holcomb yesterday, and she had different details about what CTE in Vermont, what the proposal is, than I had. So there's some details out there that are unclear, and it would be really fantastic for us to kind of get a more concrete proposal. And then along with that, just thinking about the timeline of what we're looking at, we know that we want to make changes soon and not kick the can down the road, but we also really want to make sure that we're making changes that make sense and that we've thought things through so we don't end up in bigger problems. An example of that, just how the specificity and interaction between different things matters. So for building trades, a few years ago, the legislature came up with the revolving loan fund, which is to help support building trades programming. And we use that, and part of our goal in using that was so that we could expand our building trades programming. We have high demand for that, and we'd really like to have 2 sections so we could be serving 64 students instead of 32. So we had the legislature put the revolving loan fund into place. were kind of, that was a big support, a big help. And then on the other hand, the legislature also had some PCB requirements, which has shut down 3 of our classroom spaces this year. So we've been really affected by that. And so those two things together, we were on the verge of being able to have another building trades program. But then since we don't have space, we just literally don't have another place that we could put students since we lost 3 of our classrooms and had to repurpose things. So I think I say that example, not as an ask to solve the PCB problem or anything like that, but just to point out that the details of the proposals really matter, and how those details interact with each other matters quite a bit in terms of what we do on the ground. And at the end of the day, our goal is to serve more students. We really want to increase access to CTE, as Jay noted. We absolutely have places where we have higher demand than we have either teacher capacity for or physical capacity for. And we really would like to serve students even better in terms of coordinated curriculum work and things like that, so that we can help serve Vermont students. And so with that, folks have questions.
Questions? Go ahead.
Oh, I don't have a question.
Can be, Herb Olson, can be maybe a little more specific about what changes, at least in your view, resulted in closing 3 of your programs, classrooms? I can't remember.
For the
What-
PCBs,
what changes in your view resulted in what you had to do?
so for PCBs, we got testing results back that were higher than the state limits. And so we had to close 3 physical spaces. All those programs are still running, but the kind of downstream effect of that was that we repurposed a bunch of different spaces.
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, I certainly know what you're going through with the PCB issue. I could tell you that the revolving loan fund came from this committee. PCB did not come from this committee. But I understand how that's working out for you as well. So, but I think we share all your aspirations for students as well. John?
So thank you very much, Erica. I know that you mentioned having a sort of an interesting sort of combination of students from Vermont and New Hampshire, and I'd like to know more about just if there's if you've seen or have any sort of insights around coordination among New Hampshire schools that are utilizing the center, that might be good lessons for us to be aware of, or that might help us inform our conversation today, as we sort of, have heard a lot about some of the challenges around calendars and other sort of basic units of availability, et cetera.
Yeah, I would say on the day-to-day, we've got great coordination and great collaboration with our New Hampshire schools. One of the things they're pretty excited about, so we do have, I think nearly every district has the same February and April vacations for next year. That's something that a number of people have been working on at different levels. And the New Hampshire schools are we in Hartford moved our February vacation 1 week later for next year. And the New Hampshire schools are excited about that because it aligns better with their sports schedule. So there's some little things where there's coordination. We're in contact with the other schools daily on kind of the day-to-day student things, but there are some challenges in terms of different graduation requirements. So New Hampshire has more specific graduation requirements than Vermont. So in some cases, students in our programs aren't able to be awarded a math credit if they are in a New Hampshire school, because New Hampshire requires like a specific course title, such as Algebra 1. And our credits that we are giving are often a general math credit. So there's, I think, some challenges there, but nothing insurmountable. We've got some pretty strong relationships. And in the Upper Valley in particular, we're very much a bi-state region. And so we're going to continue to work together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. 330 students in a 2 hour, a half day schedule. So is that roughly 165 morning, 165 different ones in the afternoon, or do you?
That's exactly how it works.
Okay. And another question, if I may, do you get any sense of some of this competitive funding from the New Hampshire side of the river that we've been hearing about over here between sending schools and your programs? Where, you know, if the student's gone from the high school, then the dollars follow them to the CTE, et cetera.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely some concerns. I got a call from one of my New Hampshire counterparts earlier this fall as they were starting to budget, and they were like really wanting to know what the tuition was because that's something that they have to budget for. I think any changes that we are looking at are probably going to still be the same for them. I don't imagine how else they would do it other than continue to pay tuition to us. And we've kind of worked through that just through conversation, but it is a challenge. The one thing with us is that our New Hampshire schools like Lebanon and Hanover are a little bit bigger. So students coming to us doesn't necessarily diminish their programming because they're not tiny.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, the PCB, and I'm sorry to ask about PCBs, but the PCB levels were higher than the Vermont statute, but lower than the federal limits?
Without having the numbers in front of me, I don't want to answer that and give the wrong information.
Okay.
The questions?
Can I make a
Michael?
comment about that? Because it's really irritating that we're costing so much money for our institutions.
For taxpayers.
Yeah, you're right, our taxpayers.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? 'Cause we know we know the health issues with PCBs as well, so. You know, what do you do?
We set a standard and which happens a lot with our school systems. We set a standard and then we don't fund the standard. Sorry. My favorite career center superintendent. Well,
Erica, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We certainly appreciate your time and we're hoping to learn more next week with the next APA report.
Thank you for the opportunity to share. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
Jody, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Hi, I'm Jody Emerson. I'm the Superintendent Director at the Central Vermont Career Center, which is your newest school district in the state of Vermont. We started in 2022. And I would say we are open to change and recognize that we may lose that title, and that's okay, as long as it supports our students. I brought some materials because CTE does get to market. We need to use our funds to do that, to bring in kids. And so I have 6 copies of our program of studies and 6 copies of the annual report for you to share. Sorry, I didn't bring enough for everybody. But
How's that
we have a chance.
available?
It's all on our website.
Okay.
So you can absolutely look it up there.
Can you send the link to Anna Grace?
Yes, I will. Let me write that down so I don't forget.
Post it on our webpage as well.
I'm hanging out all day today because I get to go to Senate Ed later. So hopefully in between I can remember to do that. I think Jay did a good job of starting us off, so I should thank him for that. But I want to talk a little bit about, I became the director at the Central Vermont Career Center when it was still a part of the Barre Unified Union School District in 2021. Before that, I worked at U32 as an associate principal for 8 years. And before that, I was a teacher at Spalding High School. So Spalding and U32 both are in my sending region and send students to me. So I had experience there. And much of the time that I was working at U32 and some of Spalding, I was living in the Harwood district and my son went to the Harwood schools. So 3 of my sending schools I know pretty well. My son was a graduate of Randolph Tech. He got waitlisted in the auto program for Central Vermont Career Center. And once that happens, you can apply to other centers. And so he did so, and he went to the diesel program at Randolph Tech. Was probably the best thing that ever happened to him. And it was a 2-year all-day program. All of our centers are different, unfortunately. And so that was a great experience for him. And he continues working in the field. He's actually been working in NASCAR, so not in the state of Vermont for the last 3 years, but I think he's coming back. I think Chasing the Dream was great. And then I think he's coming back up to work here, which was always his plan. He was always going to come back to Vermont. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle is that CTE students tend to stay in the state of Vermont. And if they do go away, they go away for training and they come back with that training. We also have higher levels of students graduating in 4 years than our sending school counterparts, partly because of the engaging education, right? It's relevant to students, come to us because they're specifically interested in our programming, and that keeps them entertained and engaged. Whereas if they're forced to stay in a sending school that they don't understand how it meets their expectations or how it's going to help them in the future, not that it doesn't, because it does, but if they don't understand those connections, it's harder to stay engaged in that programming. So it's really important to me and to all of the CTE directors that this continues to be a viable pathway for students. And I will say that my why is access for students. I was really lucky in being working in schools that I knew that my son had options. And I also obviously had the resources to be able to provide him with transportation to Randolph because he can't get there otherwise. So if a student is not going to the center in their region, they have to provide that transportation. And that's a huge barrier for a lot of our students, some of the most needy students. When we're talking about programming, this is not in my testimony, and I probably should have sent over a couple more pieces with it. I have a record number of applications for next year, 335 applicants for 240 seats. Over 60 of those are looking for plumbing or electrical, where we have 16 seats. Over 60 for 16 seats. That's a lot of students who deserve access who are not getting it. We have over 50 for welding and building trades, 16 seats again. So in our current space at Spalding High School, we do not have the room to really expand. We could expand programming into the afternoon. Currently, our students attend, we're considered full day for CTE because we do have minutes for CTE still, is 1,200 minutes a week. So it's 4 hours a day. So our students come to us in the morning and they are there from 8:30 to 12:30 in program. They eat lunch with us and then they go back to their sending schools for some other academics. Some of our CTE centers have full day with academics. So they have those other classes there at their center. Randolph is an example of that. And then there are centers like Erica's that are half day models for 2 hours a day and they transition. So they have 2 hours in the morning of one group of students, 2 hours in the afternoon. Often that might be the morning is the second year students and the afternoon is the first year students in a program. So they would have first and second year building trades, for example. So lots of differences across the state. I'm hoping that there's some plan to think about how to align that for equity purposes. I think it's hard to say that students across these different centers are getting the same thing. I think the aligned calendar where all CTE teachers could get professional development together provides an opportunity to align that and make sure that the curriculum and instruction is similar so that students, if they move from program to program, which doesn't happen a lot, but could happen, have that background in the same infrastructure. Right now, if a student was transferring from Hartford Tech up to my region and they had already done that first year, they would be halfway through my normal year curriculum. It wouldn't necessarily be a good fit for them. They might have to repeat something if they got in. So that complicates pieces. And then I heard you talking also earlier with what Jay was saying around proficiencies and credits. We still do have some schools that are using credit-based formulas and some that are using proficiencies. And of my 6 sending schools, none of them have the same proficiencies. And so trying to make sure that we know as kids are coming to us, are they on track to graduate? What are they going to need to support them moving forward? That can be difficult. One of the things that my predecessor, Petty Chamberlain, who was the director of Central Vermont Career Center, did was made sure that they basically listed, and you can see it in the program of studies, the embedded credits or proficiencies in our programs. And every school district that sends to us agreed to those. So we know students are getting those somehow, whether it's through proficiencies or credits in our sending schools, but that's not true for all of our career centers. They don't all have those agreements. So aside from the role that I have as superintendent director, I'm also the president of the Vermont Association of Career and Technical Education Directors this year. And what I did attach is our latest white paper. Erica referred to the fact that we've had several of them over the years. Scott Farr, who was he's the past president, will tell you that he was involved in a lot of those and has chronicled those. And I think they were also in that APA report. They were connected to that. Before the pandemic, there was a plan to pilot some direct funding straight off the ed fund into a couple, I think the independent CTEs, to try to figure out if there was a way to do that non-competitive piece. And then the pandemic hit and everything got forgotten and nothing ever happened. So we still would like to advocate for a non-competitive formula. The current proposal, based on what I know, and that's partly from being part of the CTE policy sprint team with the AOE, where we're getting a little bit of information in advance, I think, is that we would get 17,000 per FTE student to the BOCES or Education Service Agency for CTE, and then an additional out of the 13,200 for our sending schools FTEs, we would get 8,000 of that. So they would retain 5,200, but 8,000 of that. So 25,000 as a base amount for a CTE student, recognizing that our equipment in our programs and the space that we need costs a lot more. Some of that money would go directly back into districts because for example, I'm at Spalding High School, I pay a facilities use fee for being there. So I don't have janitors. I don't have a facilities director. I don't have a technology director. Those are some of the services I pay for. I pay for the school nurses that are there because I don't have my own. I pay for the library. So there's portions of what happens in where we're hosted that are paid for out of that. So some of those funds would go back that way. Some of them under this proposal would go to human resources. So paying instructors. It sounds like the idea would be that they are all hired by this BOCES or ESA. And so obviously there's some great things with that and there's some difficult things with that. First, we'd have to make sure we had one contract for everyone that would have to recognize industry professionals. I would say that my contract is one of the few that recognizes that if you're a master electrician, that equates to a master's degree, but not many do that. Some of the other places that are lucky to hire people at a higher rate give 2 years, 1 year for every 2 years of time in the field. And so if a plumber's been working for 20 years, they get 10 years on that scale, if the scale goes that far, right? Because they're on that first level without the bachelor's if they don't have a bachelor's, which is often the key. So those are some of the things that need to be thought about if there is this one oversight district that's doing all the human resources and paying all of the employees. That also means the directors would likely unionize and bargain, and many of the other positions across the centers. So I don't think those details have been figured out yet, but those are things that I'm thinking about when I'm asking questions in those meetings. I'm just gonna quickly look at.
I do, I want to
Go ahead.
circle back about the amount of money that you're receiving.
Yeah.
Just because education funding is as confusing as possible.
Uh-huh.
The money that you referenced, is that weighted? How does that break down? So if a student is weighted higher and they're going into the CTE program, does that mean that the sending district retains more money?
If they're weighted higher for that sending district, yes. So automatically off the top of the ed fund, and again, this is my understanding, so it's through my lens, 1.3% or 1.3 is the weight for the CTE student. And then from that district's piece, another 8,000. So if they're weighted more for whatever reason, whatever the other weights are at that sending school, then they would retain that 8,000 of whatever that FTE amount is comes to the CTE. And it doesn't come directly to me, it comes through that BOCES.
Before we go down this rabbit hole,
Yeah.
this is the
Current proposal.
being discussed. This is
Right.
not a done deal. This is
Not a bill,
This
it's just a proposal.
Right.
Just a current, what is in discussion.
Right, I just wanted to make sure, because like I said, I mean, education funding is one of the most confusing things that Vermont has. And when we talk
It's
about.
confusing right now.
Yes, exactly.
Because right now I set my budget and our ballot is separate. And the voters can return that ballot however they choose to across my 18 towns, but ours is commingled. And so it either passes or doesn't. As soon as it passes, every school is on the hook for the 6 semester average that they're sending to me. Now, in some cases that can be good because they might be sending me 60 kids, but the 6 semester average is 42. It could flip the other way, right?
And follow up on the commingle thing, just for anybody that's thinking about going to your model, commingle your ballots. And so
It's a more work for town clerks, so there is some resistance to it, and understandably so. But it keeps us from pointing fingers at one town or one group of people. And it was clearly, this is the will of our 18 towns, not this town, like not Barry voted against Waterbury or
Just
whatever.
wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
So the weighting system that, or the amount that you mentioned is in the current bill.
Well, there's no bill, or it's in the
Oh, okay.
current proposal from that APA and the agency are working on.
Okay, but the way that it's currently set up is what you just suggest or comment. So how is it currently set up?
Currently, I set my budget, and I have a very complicated spreadsheet that I have to put in the 6 semester average, what I think the state is going to tell me. Usually I have to budget before I know my numbers. So we can kind of guess 6 semester average and the base rate, which went down this year by 3%, which has another impact. And then put in all of the other pieces. So we also get salary assistance for CTE positions. So my position, assistant director, co-op coordinator, school counseling coordinator, and the special services director all get either 35% or 50% salary assistance from the state. So those are some offsets for us. And we can also put in some of the Perkins and other grant funding. But basically that rolls down into how much my tuition is, which I have to set by January 15th. And from that, I can take the base rate, which is the on behalf sort of piece. There's 87% of that comes on behalf, and the rest of it comes directly from my sending school. So I have to bill them for that piece, which is where you see the competition, right? Because they can directly see that. In the new proposal, they're saying that the first year would start from either 6 semester average or 2 semester average, whichever is better for the CTE, to set the budgeting piece at and to think about that. And that money is all coming direct from the ed fund on behalf of those students, 17,000 directly, and then 8,000 that would have gone to that school is going to come to me. So I'm not billing them, but it's still impacting the money they get for their FTEs, if that makes sense. I might have left something out. It's complicated.
Wait, sorry. So in this system, the high schools are still going to have these students counted as FTEs.
They are, yes. So they're still going to get some funding for them. The lowest amount would be 5,200. It could be more if the student is weighted more.
Okay.
In the current model and the proposal. And one of the things, another piece of that is that the salary assistance would be going away. So we would be getting this 25,000, which for me, it looks like an increase, right? It probably is a break even with that salary and piece going away. For Patricia Hannaford Center, who has a bond that they're still trying to pay off from the past, their tuition is much higher, and this would cut programs for them. If they got that direct, if we worked in the current model and we're looking at the money side by side.
So I'm going to change tax a little bit. I have a question about, so as you have programs where you have more student interest than you have spaces, what is the approach for who you admit? So sort of question about that is sort of, career centers, I think, at least historically, have been thought of as places for kids who maybe aren't as successful in the, standard sort of conventional high school. So, kind of how do you kind of maintain that while, I'm in Burlington and I know the health program at Burlington Tech has been very successful, and there's some real high flyers who have gone through that and have, headed off to school. So I'm just sort of curious about that student equity piece and kind of how we manage, you know, how you manage the success of attracting students with, you know, access.
I don't know if we do that well yet, honestly. There's a couple of things that come up for me on that. And so on one hand, we have an application process where we do pull in behavior data, attendance data, grade data, counselor recommendation, student application information, that sort of stuff. Where there is to be no special education related stuff in there. It's a blind admissions process, which means you're not supposed to have that piece. And so I think we do a really good job of keeping that piece out of it. But we do have the other data, which sometimes informally tells you some things like that, right? When we're looking at the behavior, we're particularly looking at safety because of the equipment that students need to use in our programs. And so I think taking behavior data completely away does put us at risk for that piece. What I've been doing with my board is thinking, so my board is actively talking about building a new career center, a standalone career center. That is one of their goals. And we are continuing to move forward with that, knowing that at some point the tax base might say, no way, this is too much money. You need to work within what you have. But we're looking at it from that lens of each year we see more and more applicants. We know that these students could fill positions that are opening up over the next many years, and that we need all of these skilled workers. And so we need to respond to this and provide more access, and we can't do it in our current location. So we're moving in that direction. At the same time, we're not there yet. So I have worked with Randolph Tech for next year, and they are planning to send a bus because transportation is a barrier. So basically every student that was not moved forward in our process in this first round has gotten a flyer from me that says, here are the other technical centers you can apply to. Here are some of the programs they have. And for particular students who have been asking about electrical, for example, Randolph has a program. It's not full yet for next year. You can apply there and they plan on providing a bus. But we don't have that across all of our centers, the capacity to do that. I think Orange Southwest has busing. And so they have the capability of saying, okay, we're going to direct one of our buses up there. Not every center has that, but just trying to be really proactive and share that there are other opportunities for kids to try to make that happen. I would say it's really hard. I know that because we had such high numbers, we have shadows and then we have a program preview day in our first round. And so in electrical, I know my teacher's bringing back 34 kids for program preview day on Friday, and he knows he can only get 6. But my board is also considering we have a couple of programs that are low enrolled, and one of them only has 4 students signed up for next year. We might be getting rid of that one and looking, can we open an afternoon electrical program to fill some of that gap? And what we need to figure out is how do we deal with the overlap? There's at least an hour and a half where those programs would overlap in that same space. Is that feasible? How can we make that happen? What's the best way to move forward with that? So we're actively trying to find different ways to do that. And we're still not going to solve the problem for many, many students who want access and aren't going to get it.
So that for is that fabrication? Design
Yes.
Fabrication.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It's too bad.
Yeah.
So I think you've referred to the proposal. What's the best, I assume you mean the governor's proposal?
Yes.
What's the best document that we could look at? And I know there's a lot of detail,
There isn't one yet.
There isn't one.
but I keep hearing about a proposal.
There hasn't been. The proposal is being developed right now.
Okay.
The latest report from APA has not been released yet. Next week, I understand that there's a joint hearing between Senate and House Education
Okay.
that we're either going to try to jump on with, or we will have our own hearing next week with the secretary and with APA to hear what their recommendations are going to be so that we can move forward with this whole thing. So I think let's try to stay away from
Yeah.
what proposals are, because we really don't know what those proposals are yet. I think
I didn't know if I needed to be reading
Yeah,
something
no,
that
no.
I
I
missed.
think
and that's
honestly,
why I want to make sure that everybody knows where
Yeah.
where things are sitting.
I'm curious about whether, what their report will say, whether they will switch the language to a BOCES or whether they'll stay with one or multiple districts for CTE. Because initially it was looking like one governance model, so one CTE district. And I'm curious if that shifts and if it relates to where the funding comes from. The original report was the Joint Fiscal Office. This new piece, what they're working on now is for the Agency of Education. So what shifts are in there and why might those happen? It'll be interesting to see. But we basically, VACTED's stance is based on that original report, which I think was in your documents this week. And it talks about, we want non-competitive funding. You know, we would love to see facilities and equipment growth and making sure that we can stay up to date with our equipment and our programs. That the graduation requirements, that we make sure, if I think that is a low hanging fruit through the proficiency place, that we can as a state say, these are the graduation requirements for Vermont students. And these are the ones that CTE centers can meet through these programs. And we have some really good documents that are on the Agency of Education's website around our programs and the proficiencies for the specific programs. Many of us also have integrated academic teachers who are supporting those programs and supporting students in them. And I found Jay's example of the English class really interesting because a lot of our students are accessing college-based textbooks. NCCER for construction is college level. Plumbing and heating textbooks are college level. Electrical, college level, apprenticeship level 1. Every single program in CTE that's a junior or senior level must have industry recognized credentials or college credits. So it must have 6 credits or 3 credits and an IRC or multiple IRCs, which is part of the reason that we might not be serving the same traditional number of students as we were in the past, because there is a lot more sit-down book work than there is hands-on stuff now. And we're held accountable to those standards. And so if I have a decline in students accessing those and achieving those, that impacts my funding from federal sources. And so that is part of the reason why I think the application process is the way it is. We have been, as the Superintendent's Association, working towards a common calendar, and just aligning breaks is a really good first step. So no, we don't have those PD days or even the first day of school aligned yet, but we do have the vacation week. So it's a really great first step. Looking at teacher preparation, our program, if you are coming into a career technical education center as a teacher and you're coming straight from industry, you get to start teaching and start classes in the same year. And you do that for 4 years. So you're taking college courses at Vermont State University through the teacher prep program, and you're teaching in class, which is a heavy, heavy lift for folks who are coming out of industry and not getting paid as much as they used to, but putting in a lot more time and energy. And some of them didn't like school when they were there in the first place. And so then to me, going back now can be really difficult. For me, in my plumbing program, I had a really difficult time hiring in that program when my instructor went to a higher pay district. And I ended up contracting with VHV actually for 1.5 years to bring in someone for 2 to 3 days a week to support someone that I put on an emergency license who didn't have the plumbing background. And thankfully, that person decided to retire from VHV and start working for me. But I have a very short window that I'm going to have him because I don't think he's going to do the college courses. And so he's like, this is my stepping into retirement mode. I'd like to give back and teach kids, but I don't want to go through the 4 years of training to become a teacher. So I'm going to give you a couple of years to fill the gap and go find someone else. And so I think I was really lucky to find such a great person to do that. And I'm still going to have that problem of looking for someone in the future. And so helping us to figure out a way to make this teacher prep program manageable is a good first step. And though Amy Boren, who's at the head of that right now, is really looking into that and trying to figure out ways to make it both really valuable and rigorous, but also making sure it meets the needs of our teachers.
I have a comment and then I have a question. So my comment is, as you're looking to expand, I would hope that you have such a large district area that you cover, I would hope that if there's space in any of those school buildings or any other buildings, that you could use that before you build. I know it's layers of complication and complexity, I guess, but yeah, but I would hope that that's at least on the table, right? Because as we're looking at costs that are spread across the entire state for these, for location, I guess when you read the APA, that they talk about how state or nationwide, we're looking at pushing tech into the sending schools. We're looking at pushing tech into the schools as much as possible, or where possible, into sending schools so that every kid has that experience. We don't do that very well here yet. We could, and that would give us like right steps. And the more we continue to separate that system, the harder it's going to be for us to give tech opportunities to all students, right? Because we know hands-on learning works really well for most students. So I guess that's just a comment, like I know, but my question is, can you talk about the tension between graduation, requiring students to graduate and have high outcomes, and the concept that tech is for students that aren't necessarily book learners, and how that works for you or against you? And I don't know if I'm asking that.
Yeah, I think we've done a really good job in recent years of being very clear with students who come through on tours and to shadow that it's not all hands-on. That because of the requirements that we have, there is a lot of sit time and accessing texts that are very difficult. And so that's why we need a higher literacy and math skills, or we need to support you to develop those. It is difficult because the traditionally best supported student we would want them to, and then they still would struggle with some of those components sometimes, right? Sometimes not. Sometimes they're going to raise right up to it because that's exactly what they're interested in and what they love. Sometimes they're not going to be ready yet. And so I think that's a nuance we haven't quite figured out yet, but we all are working towards. It's easy to say, I don't have enough seats. And so some of those students need to wait the extra year. And often that's a conversation I have in appeal meetings where a student didn't get moved forward and they appeal to me because I'm not involved in the admissions process. So I'm only available to hear appeals. And I can talk to them about, what do you think was the barrier to you getting in? And what would you do if they have time still to change that for next year when you're applying? What are some steps you can take? And really talking through that with them. I think some of our sending schools do a really good job of setting students up. Some of our sending schools do have some programming, especially around like digital media arts type of programming, cooking programming. A few of them still have tech ed classes, but very few. I think getting those back in, especially at the middle school levels, and having some career exploration opportunities there would be great. I struggle with any program that I'm responsible for that's not on my campus, especially if there's safety concerns with it. And so we have one off-campus program that we've had in the past that it's going to take me 15 minutes to get there if I'm at the center and I need to go to the Granite Museum where it is. And that's enough time. Like, thank goodness emergency services will get there first, right? But for me to be able to oversee that program, I don't feel confident that I am providing the oversight and supervision needed for it. And so if it's at sending schools, there has to be some level where those principals are feeling confident in their skills around that program to support it. And I don't think we have that infrastructure yet. Doesn't mean it can't be developed. So I think we keep hearing in the listen and learn tours where we heard the comprehensive high school thing. What is that? Define it for us so that we know what it is. And then we can start figuring out, how do we get there? And what does that look like? I think there is a definite fear with CT directors that we will lose our identity and lose the capacity that we have if we blend too much. But if it's what's best for kids and we know that students are getting access to those skills, I think there's a way to shift that conversation. We're just not there yet.
And there might be something to learn from Burlington Tech, where they were required to send students all over to continue tech programming. And take what worked well and where the red flags were and use that statewide. And I think we could all benefit from that.
Yeah, and it depends on how we redistribute resources. I think what I need you to all know is that CTE directors want more access for kids. We want to support CTE programming and more graduates in the state. So bring us to the table and we'll have the conversations. We want to be a part of the solution.
We want you to be part of it.
Regarding the book time. Would the CTE centers prefer less book time? And here's the thing, I mean, at the end of the day, I think of people that are working, plumbing, again, I just don't understand that for the most,
They have to know the code.
They have to know the code, but, I think, some people don't like sitting in the classroom. It just doesn't work for them. And are we failing them on being productive in our society by requiring the same standards as somebody that likes to sit in a classroom?
Do you have another way for them to get their apprenticeship level 1? Because this is being in CTE and getting that level 1 in a year of CTE classroom is a lot shorter than if you're out in the field trying to get that level 1 and going to the classes at night. So if there's another way to deliver that, maybe, but what we know is that our students in electrical and plumbing, particularly where the apprenticeship level 1 happens, they need that book time with the specific plumbing or electrical and the code books especially. They need to know quickly how to go, where do they need to go in that code book to be able to do the things they need to do. And I think that our teachers are doing a really good job of making it flow and relevant. So I would hesitate to take that away. I think if you take it away, then you don't share the value of using the code, and that's a requirement.
Okay.
So I think it could cost people later.
Just to piggyback off of that, like by and large, our trades in general are just getting more sophisticated. Oftentimes they have to use more sophisticated technology. Like whenever our, linemen come out to the house, they got more computers and doodads and things. So I think that we are running and talking about this massive tension between the upskilling and sophistication that we need as a society in folks that are non-traditional learners, and how exactly we are going to bridge that gap, because our CTEs are also geared towards high paid jobs, it's stability. And those extra requirements, I think, unfortunately, are there to get those.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the interesting thing also for non-traditional learners is that they're coming into our CT centers and they're either doing construction or they're doing plumbing or electric or whatever. But they don't realize the mathematical components that are within all of that. And I think once they easily adapt to it, and once they understand that they do understand how to do that,
Yeah.
and I think that opens up a whole new space for them to be able to book learn as well. So I think that there's a lot of benefit to the non-traditionals to be able to utilize the career centers. And it's all, everything now is all about certifications and licensure when we're talking about that. And making sure that what they're learning there can be transferred anywhere in the country.
And our survey data across CTEs talks about how students feel really at home at their CTE. They feel safe, they feel respected, they feel like they're successful, and success tends to breed success. And most of our CTE centers, when we take in our first set of students in the fall, we're at around 40% are on plans. By the end of the year, we're not at that level, but that's double what our sending schools are, right? So we're still providing access to a lot of students, and many of them come off of those plans as they're with us. Like they develop that confidence and realize, oh, when I apply it here, I actually do know how to do that thing, and or have the supports they need to move forward and the engagement to move forward.
And on the other component, I mean, like you said, Emily, there's just so much technology now built into everything, automotive. You know, computers in the cars, you have to know how all of that stuff works too. It's just things are, and I went to tech school for automotive in Rhode Island after high school. And there wasn't any computers yet in the cars, so.
Are there any, sort of state policy changes that would make it, easier to have more partnerships with, industry and local companies?
I might have to think about that one. I'm not sure. We don't struggle a lot with that piece, other than making sure that students have access to co-op opportunities where they can work as a senior in the trade of their choice.
Yeah, so that's the main.
That's the main partnership. The other way that we,
Or space.
right. I mean, some of them come in and present to our kids, and we have program advisory boards for each program that meet twice a year. That's part of statute. We would obviously love more opportunities to get input from industry, and everyone's incredibly busy. One of the things that I'm thinking about when I think of partnerships, though, the difficulties that we face are students have to choose, right? So there's that competition between high school and CTE, but there's also a competition between CTE and early college and high schools. And so a student who decides to go to early college can't go to CTE right now. That was, I think, new last year. And so we have some centers who have the 2-year programs who are losing students in that second year because they're taking early college instead. And then that diminishes the count of students that are in that second year program. And you can't pull new students into a second year program. And so, I mean, that's where I don't have that problem because I'm just 1-year programs that are full day. But for the centers that have first year, second year, it's having a pretty negative impact. And so I think Burlington is impacted by that for sure.
It definitely is.
Yeah, so those are pieces. And then one of my programs, which is also small in numbers, is an emergency services 2. And those students have been working towards a paramedic license with Vermont State University. And that, because of the credits, the number of credits they get, they earn 33. There's 12 and 12 in the fall and spring, and then there's 9 that they start before they graduate. We don't have fast forward. We can't use fast forward for that because there's so many credits. And so I'm taking tuition in for those kids and then sending it to Vermont State University to pay for that paramedicine program at a reduced rate, but still not, it's not really feasible for Vermont State University or for me to continue. And so trying to find ways that we can build this CTE to college pathway where students are earning towards an associate's while they're with us because they're getting those credits anyways, and then moving on up in a way that works for both CTEs and the universities would be wonderful. But right now, there's economic barriers to that as far as funding.
You use dual enrollment.
There's a limit on dual enrollment credits for students, 6.
Didn't think, yeah.
I mean, it's money, right? Because
Yeah, sure, but.
paying for the credits of it and you're paying for the tuition, CTE, so. And by law, we can take in adult students to our programming if they're available during the day. But if I take a student who took EMS 1 as a senior, wants to come back as an adult who's graduated, I can't. They actually have to matriculate to VTSU. I can't do that. Whereas adults should be able to come to our CTE program and access the same thing as high school students at a reduced rate, because what's in the Green Book now is 40% of my tuition for adult students. So it's like 7,500 instead of 20,000. They should be able to access the same programming.
They can't.
But they can't.
If they've not graduated, they can't access it, correct?
Correct, under the same. So, but because they're a graduate, then they must matriculate to VTSU. Even though by law, I could take them in.
I get that it's complicated.
It is.
But you said there was a change last year. that affected? the
Students used to be able to access both CTE and early college. I think it's because of the funding,
Pre-graduate, postgraduate?
pre-graduate.
Yeah, so what was the source of that? I mean, I understand it must be complicated, but what was?
I believe
Rural legislation?
that was legislation that was proposed by the former interim secretary, not the current.
Just, that's law, man.
Yes, it is.
I think it went through to Google. I don't think it went
Okay.
through. And I remember talking to North Country Career Center about they had a student that was had gone and dual enrollment in early college and was going into the health field and wanted to take an LNA course. And they were denied because they had used early college. And I think it's money.
Yeah.
Back to the question about business partnerships. Have you gotten into a cycle where graduates of the program are kind of setting up their own businesses and are able to also act as community partners?
There's been a few that set up their own businesses and then many, many that go into local businesses and come back and talk with students. One of the pieces of feedback we get from our comprehensive local needs assessment often is that we need to do some entrepreneurship courses to provide for students. And so one of the goals of that new center that Central Vermont would like to build would be a full day with academics that builds in those sort of courses.
Yeah, it seems like it could be also a potential peaking source because you're keeping so many students coming out into the trades and then getting them back into.
Yeah.
About let's transition a little bit and start talking about adult CTE. If we haven't.
Yeah.
It's a whole different animal than regular CTE. There's no really oversight of the adult side of CTE. AOE doesn't really have any, or doesn't want jurisdiction. Department of Labor either. So you're kind of floating out there. And I think in these discussions, and hopefully we're going to hear from APA next week on what their recommendation is, but you know, I've been one of the ones kicking on this can and, you know, getting sick of kicking on it, but for CTE, but how do we blend this whole system so that on the adult side too, it's you get out of you graduate and you still want some more courses. How do you blend that together and make it so it can work? And the adult side is really cash strapped.
It is. The only thing that is available, and I think this coming year might be the last year, is a grant for 20,000 from the Department of Labor for each center. And that's supposed to help us with adult ed coordinator and my center does not do adult ed well. When I arrived there, we were only offering LNA courses and we lost our LNA instructor who was amazing. And we haven't been able to fill that. We've offered the position 3 or 4 different times and people are taking other more lucrative jobs and leaving us. So we've had a serve safe managerial for a local restaurant training. We've had some emergency services types of trainings, first aid, CPR. We made an agreement with Berrytown Ambulance Service. So they gifted us a ambulance to use for our 2 EMS programs. And we allow them to use our space and our equipment for trainings. So they come in a couple times a year and use our classroom and equipment. But other than that, we don't have a lot. We just got approached by District 6 Fire and Emergency to kind of take on their trainings, and we're exploring that. It seems like a great opportunity. And we would like to do more. There are other centers, Rutland, Stafford Center, and Southwest, who have really great and big programs for adult education, and they've gotten to a point where I think as much as possible, they fund themselves. I'm not getting a sense from what I've heard so far that there is a plan for adult CTE in this proposal that you will see. I don't know what would be in the report next week, but it's been left out of the talking points so far. I actually think the Department of Labor might be interested in taking it on, and throwing it under their apprenticeship piece. And I don't know what that means for CTE centers.
I had spoken with the secretary a few weeks ago. And that was one piece that APA hadn't finished yet, was the adult CTE that they were waiting on. So I'm hoping that we will hear more on that. But I know over the years, there's been discussion of working with the state college system on, to me, it made a lot of sense that with the state college system, that would give them 17 campuses around the state to be able to provide programming, and working with the CTEs on how that could work. But I know there's been a reluctance as well from the CTE, on the CTE director side, that they're worried that state college system was going to take over. And so I think there's some opportunity somewhere for some creative thinking on working either with Department of Labor along with state college system to be able to come up with a really good, robust adult CTE program that runs in the evenings.
Just, because I'm not familiar with how the adult CTE, and I'm sure it's different from everybody, like how it runs now. So when you're talking about the programs that y'all run, are you running them like, are the adult students in class with your younger students? Are they running concurrent? Are they?
If it's adult CTE, it's after school, it's on vacations, weekends, or evenings. I think there has been a loosening up of a few things. So my plumbing instructor, who is his first year, my electrical teacher, they could do apprenticeship courses there for plumbing and electrical for beyond the first year. For adults in the evenings, they haven't taken that on. That's a new thing that they need to, above and beyond teaching all day, they need to consider whether they can have the capacity for that.
You have to also work with
Vermont State University. Yes. Yeah.
public safety contracts with state universities.
So a whole other admin burden.
Yes. Yep. Usually there's an adult ed coordinator, and it's like an assistant director type of job. And so they would have a split shift. They'd have a different shift to cover the evening activities so that I wouldn't have to be.
And then one last question is, how long do the courses run? Are they just sort of mixed bag of like 1-day workshops and like multi-week or semester programs, depending on what it is?
It depends. It definitely depends. What I've seen, when we were doing the LNA course, it would be a couple nights a week for several weeks. We've hosted a Vermont Works for Women piece that was several Thursday evenings. And then we've seen some that are just one whole week every night for a week. So
do you find that attendance is there like the uptake like? It just depends on what the subject is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I honestly haven't been involved in that a lot, and my center doesn't do it well yet.
Okay.
So I think that might be something. I know that a couple other directors are testifying in Senate Education this afternoon, starting at 2:45, and they have a little more experience with that and might be able to speak to it better than I can. Chelsea told me to text her when you're ready for hers.
So,
Maybe after lunch.
I'm thinking we only have 20 minutes left.
Means my car probably needs to move.
Maybe better if we take an early lunch and then back here promptly at 1 so that we can start. We have 2 hours left before the floor, but I don't know that we'll go that long, but yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here and before we actually hear from AOE and APA next week. But I think this gets us a good start. Understanding the complexities that are before us. So if there's no other questions. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm prepared to be here all day. So would you like me to come back after lunch?
Sure. Yeah, if there's something that pops up, some questions or anything, that'd be great. Thank you.
I mean, assuming I find a parking space that.
So you've all been invited to the cafeteria for lunch with Canadian Council. Okay. Want to go up? Welcome. And